Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mike Balsamo. I'm the 118th president of the National Press Club and the national law enforcement editor at the Associated Press. On behalf of the club's board of governors and our nearly 3,000 members, it's my privilege to welcome you to this Headliners Luncheon today. Before we dive into conversation, I want to recognize the folks who have joined us at the head table today. On my right is the First Lady of Utah, Abby Cox. Next to her, we have reporter Jonathan Franklin, Communications Director and Senior Advisor for Governor Wes Moore, David Turner, founding partner at Bracewell Policy Resolution Group, Frank Maizano, and the Bipartisan Leadership Project's Bob Mitchell. On my left, land warfare reporter for Defense News and former National Press Club President Jen Judson, Senior Editor at ProPublica Tracy Jan, Senior Advisor of Communications for Governor Spencer Cox Rob Carroll, broadcast journalist at BBC News John Ringer, reporter for Spotlight Delaware Mike Smith, and ABC News producer and former National Press Club President Jeff Ballou. Thank you all for joining us today. Not all as experienced as you.
No.
Thank you. For more than a century, this club has been a gathering place for the nation's leaders, thinkers, and journalists, a place where important conversations happen in front of a free press and in front of the public. Our mission is simple but vital: to foster dialogue that informs, challenges, and we hope inspires. A free and independent press is not an ornament of democracy, it is its safeguard. We meet today at a moment when Americans are asking hard questions about the future of democracy, about how we govern ourselves, and about whether leaders can still come together across party lines to solve problems. It's a question that goes beyond politics. It's about trust, unity, and the health of our civic life. This is why this conversation is so timely, and why we're fortunate to be joined by two of the nation's most dynamic state leaders who represent not only different states, but different traditions in American politics, and who have both sought to show that principled leadership and civility can coexist. Governor Wes Moore is Maryland's 63rd governor, a combat veteran, best-selling author, Rhodes Scholar, and the first Black governor of his state. He previously led one of the nation's largest anti-poverty organizations, bringing a focus on service, equity, and opportunity to public life. He is only the third African-American ever elected governor in U.S. history. Governor Spencer Cox is Utah's 18th governor, a farmer, attorney, and lifelong public servant whose career has taken him from city council to the state house. As past chair of the National Governors Association, he launched the Disagree Better initiative, a call to strengthen our democracy by practicing healthy conflict and finding common ground. He has become a leading voice for civility in politics at a time when it is sorely needed. Taken together, their records reflect a common belief that leadership is not just about what you stand for, but how you engage with those who see the world differently. Today, we'll explore their vision for bipartisan cooperation, the role of governors in tackling the nation's toughest challenges, from the economy to civic trust to public safety, and what lessons Washington might learn from the states. So today, we look forward to an honest conversation about the challenges before us and the possibilities that remain when leaders choose dialogue over division. Please join me in welcoming Governor Spencer Cox of Utah and Governor Wes Moore of Maryland to the National Press Club. Gentlemen, I want to start with a question to both of you. We meet at a moment when the American democracy feels under pressure. We've seen talk of federal takeovers of city, National Guard troops posted in Washington and Los Angeles, and partisan redistricting battles that could reshape Congress. At the same time, public trust in government is low, and the political rhetoric has grown even more heated. From your seat as a governor, do you believe our democratic institutions are holding, or are they more fragile than most Americans realize?
Wow.
Heavy first
All right,
question. We're jumping right into it. We do news here.
That's the opener. This is great, Mike. Ladies and gentlemen, it's great to be here with you. It's great to be here with my dear friend Wes Moore. And these are very important conversations. That's why we're here. The truth is, though, I had to make sure Wes was here so that the room was full. So we know how this works. Look, I think the answer to so you asked two questions, or one question with two answers. I think the answer is yes to both of those questions. I think our institutions are holding, and I think they're more fragile than ever. And I think you can think both of those things. As a political science student, a student of history, I think we as human beings, it's very natural to see the lens through the right now. We all have a recency bias, and it's really important to go back and look at the history of this great country. And when you do that, it gives you hope. It puts things into perspective. We've certainly had hard times before. We've had challenges to our institutions. We literally had a civil war where 600,000 people lost their lives. And so when I hear it's worse than it's ever been, I'm like, it's been a little worse at times. And you don't have to go back that far. I mean, you have to go back, maybe before the two of us were born. But for some of you, in the 60s, there were some really rough things that were happening in our country. And so I think that helps put it into perspective. You asked about trust, and my team gets tired of me talking about trust, but I believe that trust is the currency of governing. And I believe that all of the questions we're going to be talking about today, at the core of that will be trust. And why are people losing trust in their government is the question we should be answering ourselves. The Edelman Group does their trust index every year. They look at trust in different categories in 50 different countries. And we see trust declining precipitously everywhere, but especially in the United States. And a few years ago, they actually defined trust for the first time. And it was very simple. Trust is made up of two things. It's ethical behavior and it's competency. Those are the two things you need for trust to exist. And so when I think about why are people losing trust, one, are we acting ethically as elected officials? And two, and I believe this is a huge one, it is the competency piece. And that is, we're not doing what government was intended to do. When Congress is broken and floundering and nothing gets done, and it takes me 15 years to get a permit to build a transmission line across the state of Utah, for one example, then I'm going to lose trust and faith in government. And I'm going to be looking for someone who can come in and say, well, I'll get it done, and I don't care how we do it, we're just going to do something. And that resonates. So that's where I think, again, we can talk about rebuilding trust, but those are the things we're going to have to do, is we have to be honest and we have to do things the right way, but we actually have to do stuff. And we've gotten really bad at doing stuff in this country.
Yeah. First, this really is a joy, and it's great to be back. Excuse me, and thank you so much for having me. And thank you for giving me, and as always, a great opportunity to be with my friend Governor Cox and Madam First Lady. It is wonderful to see you as always. Listen, I think about where, I think about something that Governor Cox shared with me one of the first times we met. And it's a piece, and I always quote him on it, where he told me, he said, a governor can do anything. A governor just can't do everything. And so it really comes back to, what then are you going to prioritize? And what are you going to focus on? And I think right now, this moment has led for each and every one of us as governors and as leaders to think about one of the things that we have got to make sure that we are prioritizing and protecting. Might not have been something that was high on your card when you first took office, but it is a preservation of democracy. It's a preservation of the rule of law. It's a preservation of the Constitution. And knowing that, yes, a governor can do anything, a governor just can't do everything. But one thing that we all must do is actually follow the Constitution and follow the rule of law. And I think when we think about it through that lens, and we think about the fact that, that so many of the pressures that we are seeing on our various institutions, it actually, whether you're talking about institutions of higher education, whether you're talking about institutions of, whether you're talking about government, whether you are talking about the military, whether you're talking about the courts, all of them fundamentally, there's a common thread that is tying all those things together, and that's laws. It's a foundation that holds all of them. That's what's being pressure tested. Do they have what it takes when we are watching, which is, and again, I don't think this is a partisan comment to say, which is a relatively, and especially in recent history, a pretty unprecedented overreach and grab. Do they have the mettle to be able to hold? Or are we going to watch people just sit silently? Are we going to watch people just sit quietly? Are we going to watch people who are then picking and choosing what it is that we are going to uphold and what it is we're not? And it goes back to the second point that Governor Cox laid out, which I think is an incredibly important point. It is about this question of results. Because I do think for a lot of people in our country and a lot of people in our democracy right now, where if I'm saying that I just want to blow this thing apart, there's a good amount of people in this country that says, blow it up. Because it hasn't worked for me. You know, I say something that, you know, and people laugh, and it's actually not, but it's actually real. Like, when I told my family that I was running for governor, I had to convince many members of my family to vote for me. And it's not that we're not cool, like we're cool. I had to convince them to vote. I had to convince them even to come out and cast a ballot. That we have to be honest about that for a lot of people, the fabric that we stand by, that we fight for, that we will give everything up for, that is actually what's being tested in people's minds and people's hearts right now. And so I think that we have to both give people an idea that we are going to fight for these values and understanding that we are going to fight for our foundations. But we also have to show them that these foundations are worth fighting for. Because if it just feels like that we're doing it on a principle's sake, but they're like, but you're still not hearing me on the things, on the reason that I'm actually rooting for the disruption, then we're never going to be able to get to a better place as a larger country. And that is, I think, in this moment, that's the context of leadership that I think for, you know, all of our leaders here, that we've got to navigate, but everything is on the line on whether we navigate it or not.
I want to come back to a bunch of those points, but Governor Cox, let me go over to you and talk a little bit about civility. So, as chair of the National Governors Association, you launched the Disagree Better initiative and urged Americans to model civility in politics. You've argued that you can debate passionately by still respecting your opponents, but Washington often rewards outrage more than cooperation. So, in a system where division has become the currency of power, how do you make civility matter?
Well, that's the thing, right? That's what we're fighting for. It's why we're here today. The incentive structure is totally messed up. You're right. It's not just that Washington rewards outrage. It's that every single one of our brains rewards outrage. You see, we're fighting against human nature here. There is when you gamble. There's a part of your brain that releases something called dopamine. It feels good when you pull that lever on the slot machine. When you eat that candy bar, same thing, a dopamine hit. Hopefully we don't have any people on fentanyl right now. Same stuff, all right? It does the same thing. It makes you feel good for a moment, but then there's a crash that comes afterwards. That dopamine hit comes from outrage as well. And so when you turn on cable news, I'm sure I'll offend some people, or you open up Facebook or Twitter or Blue Sky or whatever, and you see the outrage, that righteous indignation that we all feel, that's a dopamine hit. And it is as addictive as gambling. It's as addictive as fentanyl. It's as addictive as the candy bars that I can't stop eating, right? And so that's the reward system. And really starting with cable news, and now it was kind of an injection, and social media now. Well, that's like having an IV of this stuff, of outrage into us constantly, and so it becomes so easy for us to get caught up in the outrage. Now, I don't have an answer to this, except we have to start making different choices. And it's not just that our leaders, I always say that, again, I'm not the first to say this, lots of people have said this, but that the people we elect are just a reflection of us. If we expect Washington, D.C. to change, that's not going to happen. It's I have to change, you have to change, we have to change our communities. In fact, I say this, I think we make a mistake when we tell our kids that they need to go out and change the world. I think we need to stop saying that because mostly it's not true. Most of them are not going to go out and change the world. That's not how this works. But what I do say is go out and change your neighborhood and your community. That's where we need to start making this change and giving back and making a difference. And so what I will say though to this is there is some evidence, a lot of evidence. There are great thinkers working in this space. There's a depolarization lab at Stanford. We've worked with them very closely. One of the things they found is that if you can get elites to talk about this stuff, it does make a difference. And in elites, that sounds terrible. That's their term, not my term. But they mean people in culture. So elected officials or celebrities, if you can get them talking about depolarization, if you can get them talking about civility, about dignity and respect, that's why through Disagree Better, we started filming ads together, Republicans and Democrats. Governor Moore was kind enough to do an ad with me where we talked about our differences, and then we talked about the things that we have in common. We're both dads. We're both husbands. We both love college football. We have great hair. These are the things that bring us together. And as Americans, that's the secret. When I was growing up, I didn't know who the Republicans and Democrats were in my neighborhood, in my congregation. I had no idea. That was like the 10th or 11th way that we described ourselves. We were Americans. We were Utahns. We're from Fairview. That's the small town I grew up in. We were farmers and ranchers. I'm an Aggie from Utah State, right? We love the Utah Jazz. Those are how we defined ourselves. And then eventually you'd get down to Republican or Democrat. Now it's the number one way we define ourselves, and it's toxic and it's tearing us apart. We have to go back to the things that remind us who we are and bring us together.
Amen.
Governor Moore, you've talked a lot about service and shared responsibility as forces that can unite people across divides. You've also emphasized that no one is left behind in Maryland. In today's climate, though, compromise is sometimes treated as betrayal. So how do you convince your own base that reaching across the aisle isn't weakness, but a necessary part of governing?
You know, I think a big part of it for me was I did not come up in a political family or a partisan environment. And so, you know, I made a commitment when I decided I was going to run for governor that I never learned it, and I'm not trying to start now. That, you know, when I ran, I was running against people who were statewide elected officials and, you know, cabinet secretaries. I literally ran against the former head of the DNC, like the former head of the Democratic Party, and then there was me, the guy with no political experience whatsoever. And so the promise that I made to my neighbors and the people that I have in the state was that I wasn't going to bring some hardline partisan lens into this work, because that wasn't how I came up. And you know, and so when we talk about things like service, so we talk about leave no one behind, I think about the very first place that I learned that, which was I joined the Army when I was 17 years old. You know, I would say I was so young, my mother had to sign the paperwork for me. But as Governor Cox knows, after my teenage years, my mom would sign whatever paperwork the Army put in front of her. But I remember our second day of military training was when I learned that line, leave no one behind. And it was drilled into us. Ever. You don't leave anyone behind. And that then became a larger governing philosophy. That service and the importance of service, I learned that actually from the military as well. When I was campaigning for governor, there were people who I served with in Afghanistan who came and campaigned for me and door knocked on my behalf. Many of them were not Marylanders. Many of them were not Democrats. But they literally were walking around communities in Maryland, knocking on doors and saying, I just wanted to tell you about the guy that I served with. Like, that mattered. And so I knew if that could then help to shape and change my life, then I wanted to see how could we use this as a platform to shape and change the way that our state saw itself, the way that our people saw themselves. And so when we first came on board, one of the first bills that I introduced, that I testified personally on behalf of, and that I signed was a bill called the SERVE Act, which made Maryland the first state in the country that now has a service year option for all of our high school graduates, where every high school graduate now has a chance to have a year of paid service to the state of Maryland.
Yeah, we had to be number 2.
But it's beautiful because it's like, and we're not telling them what to do. If you want to serve veterans, if you want to serve young people, if you want to serve older adults, if you want to work on the environment, it is your choice. Just tell us what makes your heart beat a little bit faster. And let's give you an opportunity to do it with someone maybe from a different community, from a different part of the state. But have you all work together on a project. Because especially in this time of this political divisiveness and political vitriol, I just believe deeply that service will save us. If we can be a state, if we can be a nation where people are actually working together on hard things, getting to know each other, getting to be able to create those common bonds, that is the thing that helps to break apart this calcified division that is just sitting over people. And so for me, the idea that service is going to be important or that leave no one behind, that wasn't a political strategy. It was not poll tested. It was all I know. And so if I was going to be honest with the people of my state and ask for their support, the only thing that I could do was say, but this is the only way I know how to lead. And so that's what I'm going to give you. With everything I've got. And that's what we've stayed committed to.
So let me stay a little bit on bipartisanship here. Both of you have faced crises that test leadership. In Maryland, the sudden collapse of the Key Bridge required quick, coordinated action. In Utah, a prolonged drought, explosive growth have created challenges that affect basically every household. So historically, crises have been moments when leaders come together and across party lines. But do they create opportunities for bipartisan problem solving today, and have even emergencies become politicized?
Yeah, well, so let me just go back a little bit quickly. I so appreciate Governor Moore's leadership on service, and we literally did steal their idea. That's what governors do. That's how it works. That's why we're laboratories of democracy. We see what's working, and I do have to say that again, the research shows very clearly that service is a way to depolarize our society. It's not. I mean, it's intuitive, but the research actually backs it up. It's also good for your health, by the way. And we have now a lot of psychiatrists before they will prescribe medication are prescribing actual service. It lowers your blood pressure, it helps with your mental health. There's so many good things that come from giving back, and that makes a difference. Look, I don't want to compare any type of tragedy or emergency that we've had to the Key Bridge, because I haven't had to face anything quite like that. I texted you that morning, and just so proud of the way that they responded. Sadly, yes, everything is becoming politicized, and usually we would get a few days when something terrible happened in our nation before we went to our partisan corners, and now you don't even get a few minutes. We're in the partisan corners before we even get the details of what happened. But that being said, it still is an opportunity for reasonable and rational people to come together, and we've certainly seen that. I know you've seen that. That we should be taking these really sticky, hard issues that, going back to the thing I said before about competency, people just want us to do something. So the price of housing is way too high in the state of Utah. It's almost doubled in the past 6 years. There's only one way out of that, and that is to build more housing. And there are so many interests aligned against us doing that. It seems so easy and so straightforward, but it's not. And so we're working across the aisle. I've had probably 20 pieces of bipartisan legislation over the past 4 years to try to encourage more building, more construction, and do it in a way that is environmentally friendly and good for everybody, and get rid of some of the NIMBYism that is out there. And then just yesterday, I see an executive order coming out of Maryland. And the first thing I did last night at midnight was send it to my housing team and said, I don't know what Wes is doing, but we need to look into it and steal whatever you can. So there is right now, if you're looking, I know we've been kind of negative, but I want to give you some hope. There is this idea of an abundance agenda that is forming, and it is on the right and it is on the left, and governors are sharing ideas. We had a housing roundtable a year and a half ago, and I wish the entire nation could have seen it, because if you came from another planet, you would not have known who were the Republicans and who were the Democrats in that room as we were discussing it, because we're all trying to figure out how to get through that. And so there is still bipartisanship happening, and it happens more at the governor's level than it does at Congress.
100%. No, and I think that's right. And I do want to say that, one thing that we learned. In fact, we were talking about this at. As you know, Governor Cox was a fantastic chair of the National Governors Association.
By the way, he's the vice chair now, so we're leaving it in good hands. Yeah.
And then it's where I first got a chance to meet both he and the First Lady was something that we call Baby Governor School, where all the new governors come on board, and the leadership then kind of educates us. By the way, my mom asked me, she's like, "What grade did you get?" I was like, "It's not a real school, Mom."
He was an A student.
But it was one of the things that we discussed. It's like, and then as governors, you kind of realize that if you have not faced a tragedy, just give it a second. Yeah. Yours is on its way. Yeah. That every governor, at some point, you're going to have something that is going to wake you up in the middle of the night. And that phone call is going to be the thing that is going to change not just your day, but will change your week, your month, your year, and potentially your entire term.
Trying to find some wood to knock on.
Yeah, really, seriously. Seriously. We all have learned when your phone rings in the middle of the night, you're never about to get good news as governors. And by the way, I just want to say how deeply I appreciate it. It's literally one of the first people that reached out when he found out what happened was Governor Cox. I'm never going to forget that. And it was something where you had this tragedy that impacted us so deeply, where in the case of the Key Bridge, where it's 13% of my state's economy was closed overnight, where thousands of workers were hours away from waking up and realizing they no longer had a job. Thousands. That we said there were 6 construction workers who were fixing potholes, who then fell 180 feet into dark, frigid waters and lost their lives. And then as that morning came, seemingly every camera on planet Earth came, and they're all centered on you and hoping you can have an answer. And how are you going to speak to your people after one of the greatest tragedies in your state has just occurred? And the thing that we knew going on board, and actually in some ways it actually goes back to, our time in, my time in the military, was I knew that from Jump Street, there are a few things that we had to establish. First of all, what were going to be the core goals and objectives that we had to be able to accomplish. And know that you had to not just say it, but say it over and over and over. We literally had daily press conferences and started with, here are the 4 objectives. Make sure we're bringing closure and comfort to the families who lost people that morning. Making sure that we are supporting our port workers and our small businesses and people impacted by this tragedy. Making sure we're getting that federal channel cleared as quickly as possible. And we are going to rebuild the Francis Scott Key Bridge, right? And say them to the point, say them to exhaustion, where literally a cab driver could tell you what the 4 objectives are. And that there had to be a unified front. That there was no time for partisanship. There was no time for dueling press conferences. There was no time for statements and the responses to statements and this and that. That we are dealing with human life. We're dealing with people that are relying on us to be adults. That we're dealing with a moment when we can either succeed as a team or we will fail miserably and know that we completely missed the moment. And I think it's something that really, as a chief executive, and I agree, one of the nice things about being a governor is, we don't do that back and forth partisan stuff. We just don't do it. You got a job to do and go get the job done. And I think that's how we had to focus for each and every one of us in the variety and myriad of tragedies, disasters, et cetera, that we will deal with in these roles. You have to make sure that you are keeping that baseline in front of you and keeping that North Star in front of you. But most importantly, your message to everybody is, we are one, guys. And there can be no breaking of that, because once that is broken, people's confidence in you and your ability to get anything done is now ruptured indefinitely. And we just don't have time for that in those kind of situations.
Let me pivot a little to news of the week. So here in the nation's...
There's news this week?
There's news. There's always news. Also, for the record, when a journalist's phone rings in the middle of the night, it is also not good news. So here in the nation's capital, National Guard troops are posted at metro stations and tourist areas. Federal officials are preparing to expand immigration sweeps into Chicago. Meanwhile, in Baltimore, violent crime has dropped to levels not seen in decades, a sign you've said, Governor,
Yep.
that local strategies are working. If federal authorities sought a similar Guard deployment in Baltimore, as the president has suggested, without your request, would you accept it? Or would you see that as the administration overstepping state sovereignty?
100%, I would not accept it. And there's no need for it. It makes me think about, the last time I was here, I was actually giving a talk about crime. It was about almost 2 years ago, standing like right here on the podium. And basically saying that we are taking an entirely new approach to the way that we're addressing crime. Because when I first came on board as governor, there was a legitimate crisis. That in Baltimore City, when I was sworn in as governor, was averaging about a homicide a day. That the state of Maryland, over the 8-year period before I became the governor, saw the homicide rate nearly double. The non-fatal shooting rate did double. So there was a legitimate crisis that we had to be able to address. And literally standing right here, talked about how Maryland was going to take a new type of approach when it came to public safety. And we made historic investments in local law enforcement, making sure we're getting more boots on the ground and saying, yes, we can have a police force that moves with appropriate intensity and absolute integrity and full accountability. That we made historic investments in technology and predictive analytics in our Maryland Coordination and Analysis Center, and making sure we're actually sharing intel and sharing information, because so much of the crime was cross-jurisdictional. And also saying that we could have technologies that could stop crime before it happens, and also saying if someone committed a violent crime with a firearm, I want them in handcuffs in 24 hours. And we were going to invest in our community and community violence intervention groups and community violence interruption groups, because so much of the violence we were seeing was retaliatory by nature. Now, 2 years removed from standing right here, here are the results. That the homicide rate in the state of Maryland since I've been the governor is now down over 20% since I've been the governor. That we're watching how Maryland's having amongst the fastest drops in violent crime anywhere in the United States of America. The last time the homicide rate was this low in Baltimore City, I literally was not born yet. 2 years. And so I am deeply offended by what we are seeing from the White House right now. I'm deeply offended because it's massively performative. Because you are asking members of our National Guard, who, by the way, are citizen soldiers. These are people with other jobs. These are people who still have their families relying on them, who are now being asked to come to Washington, D.C. to rake mulch and clean up trash and help people with their luggage when they arrive at Union Station. Because you know why? They're not trained to do municipal policing. Do you know who is trained? Local law enforcement. FBI and ATF agents. By the way, people, when you're looking at FBI and ATF agents, are people who, if you look at the president's proposed budget, actually proposed to cut funding for them. But the answer is the National Guard? People who are trained to address natural disasters and fight and win our nation's wars overseas, that we're now asking to deploy to American cities? This is performative. It's not a serious proposal. And I have too much respect as someone who has worn the uniform of this country, who's deployed overseas, who's had to say goodbye to my family. I have too much respect for members of our National Guard to ask them to do something that is simply political theater. And I refuse, as the Commander-in-Chief of Maryland's National Guard, to authorize my men and women to go do something that is theatrical or for a political benefit. And so we will 100% work with the federal administration if they want to be serious. We will 100% accept federal resources if they want to be serious. And I have a whole list of federal resources that I would love for the President of the United States to be able to authorize. But I'm not going to allow, and I'm not going to condone members of our National Guard to go there because it is somehow some distraction or some political game that is then being played. I have too much respect for them, and frankly, I have too much respect for the hard work of local law enforcement and local officials who've actually been helping to drive these historic drops in violent crime. And by the way, you know, and again, if there's any question, and this is why I personally have invited the president to come, and instead of spewing untruths from the Oval Office, join me in Baltimore. Join me in the communities, because I would love for him to come and be educated and to actually make educated comments instead of things that are just completely politically driven dribble that is actually just infusing a greater level of disconnect and frankly, a greater level of disappointment in people in our political process.
Governor Cox, let me ask you about the Utah National Guard. So in Utah, National Guard leaders have asked for volunteers to assist federal immigration agents in administrative roles, not in direct enforcement. You've said those roles must stay limited. What guarantees can you give to the folks of your state that this mission won't creep into arrests or immigration policing like we're seeing in other states?
Sure, yeah. Well, so again, those are the promises that have been made to us and the promises that I've made to my people. And I feel very strongly about that. You know, I want to go back to something that the Governor Moore said that I think is important. And this goes back to my very first comment. And you mentioned that I'm really proud of what's happening in Maryland and the Maryland miracle that we're seeing. I've heard you speak about your commitment years ago to changing law enforcement in Maryland and to taking this seriously. And sadly, that is not happening everywhere. And I think that's where the frustration has happened, especially in places like Washington, D.C., where good people who have historically been opposed to something like this are now saying, we got to do something, and at least somebody's trying to do something. And this is my point. If you don't have mayors, city councils, governors who are responsive, who aren't taking it as seriously, then people do get frustrated. And then that opens the door for these types of decisions. The same thing happened with immigration. And it's where I became so very, very, very frustrated with the past administration. Because I've been a supporter of immigration. I believe that immigration is really important to our country. I believe we are a country of immigrants, and I believe we have to be able to decide who comes and when they come. And there is a process for doing that. And yes, our process is broken. We have to fix the legal immigration piece of that. But you don't fix that by having an open border, allowing literally millions of people to come in, people who we don't know, and people who are overwhelming our systems. Again, Utah is as immigration friendly as any state in the nation, and our every institution we have to work with immigrants who are coming into our state completely broke down because they were just overwhelmed, and you can't do that, which then leads to this response where we find ourselves now. And so what we've agreed to with the administration, because they don't have enough help to take care of some very, very serious problems, we gave them a list of 160 people or 180 people who had been incarcerated in the state of Utah, who were here illegally, who had done some very terrible things, and we gave them the list for ICE to go out and find them. The problem is they're able to do that. They're able to go out and find some people who should not be here, who nobody wants here. And by the time they find them, by the time they get them processed, the holding facility is the nearest one to us is Las Vegas, which is a 6-hour drive. By the time you get them transported, the other 148 people have now disappeared. And so that's what we're dealing with. It's just a logistics issue. And so that was the question that came to us. And we said, yes, we can help with that. We can help with transportation. We can help with processing. But they are not trained to go out and put hands on and arrest and handcuff people. And so we can't do that. That's not what their training is for. And that was the agreement. And so we feel very confident we'll be able to keep that.
Let me follow up here. So there have been federal requests made to many states to send Guard troops into other state cities. Washington is a good example of that, to help with immigration enforcement and to help with in the president's crime crackdown. If asked, would you send Utah Guard troops outside of your state, or do you draw the line at keeping them in Utah?
Well, I would have to look very closely about what the request is for. Again, what are they going to be doing? I think that's really, really, really important. Like, what are you going to be doing? Again, transportation, that's something that they do. They're very good at logistics. And so we can help with some things, but there are certain things that we just can't help with. And that's always been kind of our important line in the sand, and that's a line that we will keep.
So let me ask you both this question. Critics say putting soldiers on city streets risks normalizing a military presence in civic life, something Americans historically have been very wary of. What's your red line for when the National Guard should or shouldn't be used inside American communities?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we've heard yours, and I think mine would be very close to that. Again, there are different roles on purpose. I often speak of Chesterton's fence, and for those of you familiar with philosopher, Chesterton talks about this idea that you buy a piece of property and there's an old fence there, and you're like, why do this fence? It's unseemly. Why is it here? We live in this beautiful space. We should take that fence down. And you tear the fence down, and in a matter of days, there are some cattle grazing in your garden or whatever, right? The fence existed for a reason. You just didn't know what the reason was, right? We've forgotten what that reason is. And so I think there are a lot of Chesterton fences that are kind of being toppled, and this has been happening for a long time in our political system. Not with this administration, previous to this administration, it's been happening. And then we inevitably find out, oh yeah, that's why we did this. That's why we have civilian control of the military, right? That's why we have separated community policing from military affairs, and we do that for a very good reason, and I think that those are important reasons. Now, again, there are extreme circumstances where we may have to blur that at times. We called out the National Guard during the riots of 2020 when there was severe property destruction happening, and people's lives were in danger. So yeah, I have no problem in those extreme circumstances calling out the National Guard. But again, I would just say, like, we can't just, if your answer is everything's okay, so we don't need to do this, then you're not being a serious person, and you should not be taken seriously. If your answer is, he's got a point, we should really kind of clean this stuff up, then we can have a serious conversation. And again, I would say that's the difference between what I've seen in Maryland and some other places.
And I'll say too, I think what you saw there, which I think is so important, is there is a seriousness and a soberness that I think as commanders-in-chief we take this. Yeah. I always say that I'm honored to be the 63rd governor of the state of Maryland, and I'm humbled to be the commander-in-chief of the Maryland Guard and the Maryland Air Guard, because I understand the weight that comes with that there are people who are willing to put their lives on the line every single time because I asked them to. And I think we need to there's a weight that comes with that. And, just like Spencer, just like Governor Cox, it's like there have been times when I've had to mobilize members of our National Guard, when we had historic flooding over in Western Maryland, where literally we had to have children who were trapped inside of a schoolhouse that we had to have boats go up and save them from the second floor because the first floor is completely washed out, and that was the only way of saving their lives. Right? That when we had people, when you couldn't have a fire department respond because the firehouse was washed away. Right? And this is a place, by the way, that is a place in Westernport, which is in Appalachia, that has an amazing, amazing mayor, Mayor Hamilton, a Republican woman out in Westernport, who has a budget of $2 million, having to deal with historic floods. And we were some of the first boots on ground there. And I activated our National Guard to be able to be on standby and support. We have National Guardsmen right now who are currently deployed overseas, supporting overseas mission, right now. So there is a, people of our states know we are unafraid to make the call if we need to make the call. but we do not make the call lightly, because we understand not just the power of what that means when you are activating these men and women in uniform, but also what it means to them and their families, and the obligation we have to them too, to know that this is not something that we would use lightly in any circumstance or situation.
I want to pivot a little bit, but before I do that, let me just go to an audience question here, back to bipartisanship for just a second. So, to both of you, what resistance have you faced from each of your parties in advocating for bipartisanship, and what was the toughest bipartisan compromise you've personally made as a governor?
Yeah, so like, we shouldn't be doing this. It's not overly popular. So I take that back. Look, the data is very clear on this. 70% of Americans hate what's happening in politics right now.
Yeah.
They want more of this, but they're not the people you hear from, for sure. So for me, this last year was an election year for me. We're a little different. We're one of a handful of states that our gubernatorial elections are on the presidential cycle. So everybody else is up in next year, but mine was last year. And literally my Disagree Better initiative, I had two opponents. My kind of far right opponent and my Democrat opponent, they made an ad together mocking Disagree Better about me. That the only thing they agreed on is that I should no longer be the governor. So look at me bringing people together. It's really great. So that's kind of where we are. Sadly, it's funny, it's hilarious, and it's deeply sad that this is where we are. And the criticism that I get is, and I especially get this from my party, from the Conservative Party, is like, oh, you just want us to go along to get along. You just want to compromise. And I literally called it Disagree Better, because disagree has to come first. Like, we do not agree on everything.
That's right.
And we should not agree on everything. And I have to be willing to stand on principle, the things that I absolutely believe in, and I will. And I really like this guy. And I don't have to tear him down because we disagree on abortion or because we disagree on something else. In fact, what I can do is say, okay, yeah, I know we disagree on abortion, but we both agree that that we should be helping unwed mothers who do have kids. We should do more there. We should do more to hold men responsible than we are doing, right? Like, so even in our biggest disagreements, we can find some common ground where we can work on something together, and then just say, hey, we're just going to have to disagree on this thing, right? And so I just can't emphasize that piece enough, that if you get in this work, and we have many people in this room who are engaged in this work, there are so many groups doing this type of bipartisan depolarization work in your communities, that it's tough sledding right now. It just is. It's not, the incentive structure is not aligned for this type of work. I get mocked, I'm weak, all of the stuff you hear. I'm just here to tell you that the easiest thing in the world is to listen to your partisan cable news channel and get up and do whatever they tell you to do the next day. It takes real guts to actually try to talk to the other side and to try to find common ground and to try to work together. That's where the real courage is right now in our politics, and there's too little of it.
Amen. And it's funny because there's another thing that we have in common is the fact that we are both, in our cases, we are the same party of the members of our General Assemblies. Right? And for a lot of people, they're like, oh, that must be so great. It must be so easy. For me, you have a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate, and for Governor Cox, you have a Republican House and a Republican Senate. And it's like, careful what you ask for. Because not everybody is built the same. And there are, to your point, a tremendous amount of expectations that come that it's just like, oh, because people are of the same party, that everyone just thinks the same. And it's not just wrong, it's dangerous. Where, I don't think that a single party has the market cornered on good ideas. And I don't think a single party has the market cornered on bad ideas. And I remember even going to this last legislative session, and we talked about it, where I was very clear with my General Assembly, for example, when I said, here are the 3 guidelines that I have going into this next session. right? And it's that, one, that we are not going to, and I will not sign anything that I believe is going to add or be some kind of unfunded mandate, that if you pass something with numbers, you need to find a way to pay for it. And don't just pass things that are saying this sounds like a good idea and then just turn around and look at me and say, okay, how are we going to pay for it, right? That we are not going to pass anything that I think, well, I will not sign anything that is not going to address some of the fundamental challenges that our people are facing economically. And I was not going to pass anything that was performative, ceremonial, multi-year studies. This has to be the year of action. And we have to be able to move with the responsiveness that people are asking for. And then this past legislative session, I ended up vetoing more bills than any Democratic governor in Maryland history by 5x. Because I wasn't kidding. That if things were sent to my desk that were violations of things that I was very clear about, I was going to veto them. And, by the way, most of these bills were bills that were passed by Democrats. And so I do think it does become important inside this moment and this is where the way I think we have to be able to balance it and manage it, that we believe in partnership. We believe in working together. We believe in saying that, and I love the fact that, for many members of our House and of our Senate, that we have aligned values. But we also have to be clear about what are our priorities, especially in this moment. And when we saw and have seen the kind of assaults that we have seen in Maryland, where Maryland now has had, this administration has fired more federal workers who are Marylanders than any state in this country. Almost 13,000 people have gotten fired since February. That we have now seen how $250 million has now been taken away from rural health care within my state. That we now have 250,000 people that are now on the verge of losing their health care. That we've had federal buildings like the FBI building that have been taken away, not because of any thoughtful process, but because the President of the United States made a random comment during a press conference. We have to understand what is going on right now, which means this requires a great deal of clarity and also prioritization. And so I think that being able to align with your party is fine. Being able to stretch across party lines and finding partnership is fine. But your values cannot be compromised. And you got to be clear about what are the things we've got to move on now, that we have to move with a sense of urgency that people demand, that I said we have got to stop being the party or the state of no and slow and start being the state of yes and now, and addressing the pain that people are feeling. And if we're not doing that, then there was no way that I was going to back it. And so that was complicated for a lot of Democrats, but I think we're all clear now on where I stand.
Let's talk a little bit about redistricting in the few minutes that we have left. So, Governor Moore.
It's not.
Actually, no. I give a lot of credit to you. Well, sorry.
We'll start with Governor Moore, and then plenty of questions coming your way here. In Maryland, there's been discussion of redrawing congressional maps in the middle of a decade, something usually only done after the census. For many voters, that obviously raises concerns about constant rule changing. Why revisit the maps now? And should Marylanders see this as ensuring fairer representation or about gaining leverage in D.C.?
As I'm looking at the three men up top. I do want to be very clear that I have a huge distaste for gerrymandering. I think gerrymandering is it's a stain on democracy. And I just think that especially what we are seeing right now and what is being pushed from Washington, this idea that you can somehow call up certain states and say, hey, can you find me a congressional seat here? Can you find me a congressional seat there? Is just hugely problematic. And frankly, it sounds a lot like what we saw in Georgia when he was calling election officials and saying, hey, I need X amount of votes. That's not the way this works. And mid-cycle, particularly without any new data, new census data, and just gerrymandering, I think is a problem. And frankly, I think it's something that Congress needs to act on. I think Congress, and I would call on Congress, to pass a law banning gerrymandering and banning mid-cycle changes. I also live in reality. And I know Congress has no intention of doing this, because Congress hardly has any intention of doing anything at this point. And I cannot, and none of us can just sit on our hands and allow for certain states to get picked about how they're going to look at fair maps, especially when you look at the fact that less than 10% of all congressional districts in this country are competitive. Less than 10%. That in the state of Maryland, the average congressional race, a person will win by like an average of 25, 30 points. These are not competitive seats. And so if we are going to have a conversation in certain states about what does it look like to have fair mapping and fair representation, then I think that all of us then should be able to have a thought about then what does that look like in our states too. And so I just know in the state of Maryland, all options are on the table as we're continuing to look to see how this process continues to show itself in other states around the country.
I know we're closing in on time here, so before I ask the final question, let me just take a moment to thank...
But I do want to say, I don't know if he was going to get a chance to answer, but
it's
I
great.
would say,
I think look at the time. This is fantastic.
I do...
But I appreciate his work on this, but I don't know if you want to talk about it, but I really do, actually. I really do.
I'm going to come back. I am going to come back to that in just a second here. I want to thank our headliners, team chair Jen Judson, and the club members who assisted making this event possible, along with the club staff and our executive director, Didier Saji. Thank you all for being in attendance here with us today. I hope you'll join us again next week when the son of longest-serving African-American Congressman and author John Conyers III will discuss his new book, My Father's House, at a headliners book event here on September 9th at 6 p.m. Gentlemen, I'll present you with the National Press Club mugs just after we answer this other question. So, Governor Cox, sorry, I'm not gonna let you off the hook
No,
here.
it's okay. There's a mug on the line.
There is a mug on the line. That's right. Governor, as you know, in Utah, a court ruled that lawmakers undermine voters by discarding an anti-gerrymandering initiative and splitting Salt Lake County, home to more than 1 million people, into 4 congressional districts. Critics say that dilutes the county's voice. Some Utah leaders say the courts are overreaching. Others note that voters clearly asked for an independent process. For many in your state, it feels like a fight between politicians, judges, and citizens with trust in the balance. So what's your definition of a fair map, and do you accept the judge's findings?
Well, I always say accept, judges' rulings, whether, and I do disagree in this case. This is a really tough one, and it's a little wonky, and I just, in the interest of time, I won't get into the details of it, but I share the concerns of my colleague, Governor Moore, that I hate gerrymandering. I especially hate doing it twice in 10 years. That's the only thing worse than doing it every 10 years. And so there has to be a better way. The problem is always kind of in the eye of the beholder. Democrats in our state desperately want a district, even though Republicans outnumber them 3-1 in the state. The only way to get a Democratic district in the state is to gerrymander. Again, who gets to decide is what this is about. The Utah Constitution is very clear that the legislature gets to decide. That's what it says. And so the question is now around an initiative. Is an initiative which is normally treated as a law, can it overcome a constitutional provision? And that's where the real fight is. And so that's not of interest to you. But I do think what is interesting, and I'll just conclude here since I think we're out of time, and it goes back to where I started, and this is a conversation I've had with legislators as well. I didn't draw the map, the legislature did. And that is, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I do think that we risk, I will say, we risk as the Republican Party in Utah not listening to people. That's why this has gotten them so fired up, is because they did run an initiative and they felt like they're being ignored. And there is nothing in the history of our country that makes people angrier, that makes them lose trust, than when they feel like government is not being responsive to them. I would say that extends well beyond the state of Utah and well beyond the redistricting issue. And it really extends to the moment that we find ourselves in now. I've seen people, even people within my party, but especially people outside of my party, I've seen the media be very dismissive of the MAGA type, right? The people in those red hats, and kind of look down their noses at them as uneducated and as just kind of lesser people. And I think that has led us to this moment where people really are, as Wes said, like they really do want to burn it all down. They want to throw a rock through the window. And this is their way of telling us that. And I think we ignore people at our peril. And that's the thing. Even if you disagree with people, those people, like, that's so toxic. There's nothing more un-American than hating our fellow Americans, and it is time for us to start listening to our fellow Americans, even if they don't have the advanced degree that we have, or even if they live in a blue city versus the red countryside where I grew up. I mean, we could not be more different. But one of the things I respect about this guy is, and I didn't know that much about Maryland until I got to know him, is that it turns out that Maryland isn't just Baltimore. There's a whole western side of that are my people. And they grew up like me. They grew up in poverty, in rural places that are so very different. And this guy wasn't afraid to go out and sit down with them and have conversations with them and listen to them. And that's what people are dying for. They're begging for that right now. And that's what we desperately need more of. So again, thank you for being here. I love to say that I'm going to quote Yuval Levin, who said, "I'm not optimistic. Optimism is this idea that good things are just going to happen. And in the history of the world, good things have never just happened." In fact, he said optimism is a vice that is not that much different than pessimism. It's that things are outside of our control. But he said, "I am hopeful." And hope is the virtue that sits between the vices of optimism and pessimism. Hope is this idea that good things are going to happen because we can make them happen. And I still believe in us. I believe in the, as we're about to celebrate 250 years of the Declaration of Independence, that grand experiment, those ideas that our rights don't come from government, but they come from on high, and we're endowed with those rights, that all of us are created equal. That we are endowed with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And those principles are as true today as they were 250 years ago, and I'm hopeful that we will remember that as a country.
Gentlemen, thank you. Let me present each of you with signature National Press Club mugs.
Thank you.
As a token of our appreciation.
I earned the mug.
You earned the mug.
Didn't blow it. It's great.
Thank you both for being here today. We know you have incredibly busy schedules, and we ask that members of the audience please remain seated while the governors exit. Thank you.